Welcome to the Amplifying Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Tara Lehman, a partner, coach, and consultant at Twin Life Coaching and Business Services, of which Amplifying Leadership is a division. This podcast is a place dedicated to amplifying your leadership through our guest stories, tips, information, and more. To learn more about our leadership division, please visit us at amplifyingleadership.ca. Today, I am welcoming Ashlee Cervantes Thomas, a seasoned security executive who is passionate about all things related to security solutions, physical risk mitigation, and management. Welcome to Amplifying Leadership.
Thank you so much, Tara. I'm happy to be here.
And I am thrilled to have you here. And, I love to start out with understanding your leadership story a little bit so we get to know you. So tell us a bit about your leadership story.
That's a fun journey that I've gone on all these years. I think the very first time I began to unpack that word leadership was in middle school. I was invited to a special leadership camp, and it was the first time that I really began to understand what it means to be a leader and sort of unpack that. Specifically the type of leadership that is servant leadership, which is where I find myself most naturally falling of all the various types of leadership that exist in the world. And so I have gone on a really fun journey, really from that young age. And I've been in various places of leadership, various roles of leadership throughout my life, and I have sort of naturally fallen into that role throughout my lifetime, really since then.
That's awesome. And you're the second person to tell me that they took a leadership camp in school and it really helped them understand leadership more. So it's very interesting because leadership tends to start somewhere in our childhood, even the inklings of it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's just really fascinating kind of how that journey unfolded. And you can kind of go back now, hindsight's always 2020, and
Yeah.
I see the road that was sort of paved and sort of where it began. And it just has been such a fantastic journey. And I feel that I've been afforded so many incredible opportunities to be mentored by great leaders.
Excellent.
And in so many points in my career and in my lifetime where other women, like female leaders, have put a hand out behind them and really pulled me up. And so it's just been such a fun journey. I think naturally I fall most comfortably out of the spotlight in leadership. So I'd rather be the leader behind the scenes. I think the role where I really first uncovered this was again as a child, really in high school. I ran for vice president of the student body, and that role really was the first time I got to see what it's like to be in that leadership role. But I wasn't the president, right? I was the kind of behind the scenes person, sort of making everything happen, and that was where I really fell in love with that kind of essence of leadership.
Wow. Before we get into your fascinating topic today, I want to ask you something because you mentioned mentorship and female leaders helping the leaders coming up. Can you share with our audience why you feel mentorship is so important when it comes to leadership?
Oh my gosh, it's like you and I have been friends our whole lives. I'm talking a lot about my childhood today, which is fun because I feel like I don't get to talk about it that often.
Awesome.
My high school senior project in California, that was a really big deal around the time I graduated. It was this year-long project that they really start prepping you for kind of your junior year, and it's a big part of your exit out of high school. You have a whole panel of community members that can be school board members, local businesses, parents, alumni. They just really do a good job of putting together a pretty diverse panel for each senior presenting. And so I just remember spending the entire year gearing up for this big presentation, and my topic was on mentorship
Oh,
and
wow. Okay.
the mentee mentor relationship, especially for children. I think when you talk about, so many leaders can go back and pinpoint that point in their journey as a child when their leadership began to unfold. I have found that so much of that was really shotgunned and spearheaded by an older peer mentor. And
Mm-hmm.
so I am so passionate about that for both children. And then I think, as we grow up, there's just so much beauty behind that mentorship, that mentor mentee relationship. And it is truly a give and take. I've been now in my adult life, I've been a coach for high school sports. I've been a head coach. I've been really involved in that for youth. And at the same time, I really try in my workplace to pull up and provide that opportunity wherever possible. But I'm always looking for that person that's going to help grow me and mentor me and find ways that, again, that can be a symbiotic relationship where it truly is give and take. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
so important, and it's so beautiful what comes out of those relationships.
It's all about growth and learning, right?
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
All right, let's get to your topic today, which is being the guardian of our business as leaders and business owners who are in our audience. But we need to first understand, what do you mean by that? So, explain that a little bit for us.
Absolutely. So I have a physical security background. I started in security at a pretty young age in loss prevention, and I have spent a career growing and learning and developing in that space. And one of my favorite things is to give back to business owners, executives in that way, to share some of that knowledge. And so, unfortunately, the world that we live in today, security and specifically physical security is a topic on everyone's minds. And if it's not, it really ought to be, especially
Mm-hmm.
here in California, where I am based. There's been a big legislative push to help bring this to the forefront for business owners and executives out there to ensure that we're doing everything we can as leaders to make sure our workplaces are safe. And so, unfortunately, I feel like this falls a lot of times on the business owner, the HR executive, right? This
Mm-hmm.
somebody who really typically, I mean, depending on your industry and your background, most of those folks aren't going to have a solid platform or an understanding of physical security. And so, what I like to give back to these busy executives is just a few golden nuggets, just a few things that can help you. Step one is awareness. I spend a lot of time with my clients and my team doing disaster planning, right? Emergency prevention and planning is really critical in my line of work. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're the ones who call out the elephant in the room. What's the worst case scenario? What's the worst thing that could happen? And then what are we going to do about it? And
Yeah.
so I really like to give back in that way. And so when we talk about being the guardians of your own communities, your own businesses, your own clients, your own employees, I have just a wealth of knowledge that I is bursting at the seams that I want to share with folks.
Yeah. So I have to ask, because, I sometimes work with my clients about what is that worst case scenario, not around physical safety or safety, but other things like leadership topics. And what do you do to plan the risk around that? So I find it very interesting that you talk about that. So now I'm sure I'm not the only one here who's very curious, sharing what you can. What are some of the worst case scenarios that you see, especially because you're in California too? I think that's, a little bit different than I'm up in near Toronto, Canada. So it might be a little bit different down there. But what are some of those worst case scenarios that you're helping build risk plans for?
Yeah, I think something that unfortunately is a really hot topic in the United States, nationally, is active shooter situations. So,
Mm,
what's going to happen if an armed assailant, comes onto our premise? I know you have listeners all across the globe. Something
yeah.
that has come up now in other regions, is bomb threats and even
Yes.
activists. We use the word active assailant because truly an assailant can be anybody intending to cause harm. There's a variety of ways to do that here in America. Unfortunately, firearms is kind of number one on that list right now. But in other regions, things like knife wielding, right? And
Mm,
we've seen horrible atrocities where, dozens of folks have been killed in a matter of minutes by somebody wielding something like a machete or a large
yeah.
knife. And I say unfortunately because it truly is horrific to watch any footage related to an active assailant,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I've specifically watched footage um, of folks with a very simple knife do unspeakable damage very, very quickly. So again, I say that to say there are lots, infinite possibilities when it comes to our physical
Yeah.
safety and folks who want to cause us harm. And so I really, in all of my education out efforts, I really want to empower folks. My job is not to scare you. My job is to
Hmm.
empower you to understand here's what could happen and here's the steps that you could take if that were to happen. And even better, let's back it up a bit and let's talk about the steps to take to prevent, hopefully, or do
Bingo.
all of the
Yeah.
preventative measures that we can towards stopping something so atrocious from happening in the first place.
Yeah, I think you hit that one right there, right? It's about the preventive measures that we can take so it doesn't happen or we can mitigate what does happen. I mean, some things you can't change or fix, but it's because some of those worst cases are out there. So let's talk a little bit about that empowerment around safety with leaders, if that's okay. Because I can imagine that sometimes when you're dealing with clients and there's some challenges that they have, whether that be I can't do this because of financial reasons or resource reasons or whatever that is. How do you help empower those people to know that? I mean, they know safety's important, so that they already
Absolutely.
know, but how do we empower them a little bit more to really do something to be preventive or proactive?
Yeah, there's just so many resources. I spend quite a bit of time helping smaller businesses. It's something I'm really passionate about. I'm a little bit of a serial entrepreneur myself, and I love helping those smaller organizations who realistically aren't gonna, be able to budget for the services my company offers anytime
Right.
in the near future. But helping even those folks just to understand this, I think the most empowering thing I can do for anybody I meet with is to understand what resources are at your disposal.
Yes.
Um, in today's world, we have Ring cameras and Nest cameras and all of these things that are just an added layer. I don't want to give anyone a false sense of protection, but at the same time, I want to empower you to understand if you're budget conscious, there are budget friendly measures we can take. That is something. There's something we can do. And again, really just having that plan is step one. And once you
Hmm.
have that, I think so many people in today's world, our default is kind of stick our head in the sand and pretend like it's
It
not
doesn't exist.
happening. It doesn't
Yeah.
exist. But what I found is that is actually really anxiety provoking, right? When you're not
Hmm.
looking around to see, like, okay, this is the worst case scenario and I know how I would handle it. But instead, just like, oh, everything's fine, I'm fine. When nothing is
Yeah.
really fine, right? We know there's possibilities, there's threats everywhere, there is the risk of something, tragic happening. So how do we balance those two things? I think we don't want to live in that doomsday world, but we
Yeah. Yeah.
also don't want to just bury our heads in the sand. So finding that happy medium, I really feel is my number one role when I'm meeting with clients and executives for the first time, to sit down and say, okay, well, let's have an honest conversation about where's your risk, and then we
Hmm.
can take the next steps of, okay, well, what can we do about it?
So that brings me to a question then, because say as an employee, I'm seeing my leadership team going and implementing all these cameras and all those things. And
Yeah.
so I'm starting to get a little fearful, right? Am I safe to come to work? Like, why are we doing this? So could you tell our leaders and business owners out there maybe something that they, around communication and how we can make sure that our teams know this isn't a scary thing. It's we're just making sure we're good to go type thing so that you don't
Yeah.
have that fear base happening?
Training. That is
Ah, love
something
that.
my
Yeah.
my organization provides. There's a million organizations out there that provide various types of workplace violence prevention training. But I think you get your team in a room together and we call out the elephant in the room together. You build them in, you make them a part of that process. The way that I write my workplace violence prevention plans for my clients is we draft everything, we prep it, we do a site walkthrough prior. And then once it's all drafted and prepped, we don't disseminate that out to the employees until we've sat down and had that interactive training with the entire team. So whether your organization is 7 employees or 700 employees, obviously maybe aren't going to have all 700 sitting down at one time, or maybe you are.
Right.
I mean, depending, who you are, but
Right.
my recommendation is those smaller setting groups where we come in and we have honest conversations, whether that's by department or by team or by location, and we call it out. And you would be so surprised how many employees aren't sticking their heads in the sand, and they already have had those questions and thoughts and they didn't know where to take them. So they're just sort of sitting with it. They're like, oh my gosh, like, what if an active shooter walked into my customer service desk right now? Or, oh my gosh, what if somebody wanted to rob me on my way? I do these trainings all the time for your controller who's handling your cash, which
Right.
hopefully your controller isn't handling your cash, but especially for smaller businesses,
They might
oftentimes they
be.
are. I
Yeah.
have had so many smaller businesses to large or medium sized businesses who have, a 5'2", really awesome, 150-pound female who's carrying tens of thousands of dollars in cash from their
Yeah.
business location to the bank by herself. And she's doing that every Wednesday at 2 p.m. And
Yeah.
there's a million problems with that, some of which we can easily mitigate. I guarantee you she's 95% of the time, she's already had that thought, oh my gosh, what would I do if? And
Yeah.
maybe she didn't know who to voice that to or how to voice that. And she didn't want to, worry her boss, or maybe she did say it to her boss and her boss didn't really have a great answer. So she sort of just left it there, right? There's so many examples. I've had that specific example and I'm like picturing her and she was just the sweetest, kindest thing. And like, oh gosh, how many thousands of dollars every week at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday? Can we just switch it up? Can we go maybe on a Tuesday
Yeah.
one week and then on a Friday another week?
Do you know, it's an interesting
Oh,
story that you share because it happened to me. I was
oh,
taking every Saturday, I'd have to go down the street with the cash bag, and it would have between
yep,
$1,000 and $5,000 in it, and
yep,
not the
yep,
safest place, but not horrible. It wasn't bad.
yep,
And I was younger, and I am only 5'2" and like 125 pounds,
yep,
at the time.
uh-huh,
And it was just, it always went through my head, that
yeah,
there's people around here I don't trust. And they know I'm here every Saturday. And at 1 o'clock when I leave, I take the cash bag. So I've been there.
yep,
I've had those thoughts. So
yep,
it's really interesting
yep,
that you bring that up because it is truth that
yeah,
every
it
week
is.
I was scared and I was only going like half a block.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine if you were, driving to a location that even just getting in and out of your vehicle alone adds another element, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
just when you layer those things on top of each other, it really gets complex kind of fast. And
Yeah.
so, that's just so much of the work that I do and that I'm so passionate about doing. And I think, to your original question, we training, right? We have to start with
Mm-hmm.
having an open, honest conversation. The world is what the world is, right? And we can't control that. And all you have to do is turn on the news for 10 seconds and see the plethora of possibilities of
Yes.
what could go wrong and what is going wrong in other places. And so, I don't like to operate with the mentality of not if but when, because I think that lends itself to some danger as well. But we do, when we're building a plan, that's how we want to write our plans.
Mm-hmm.
Is not if this were to happen, but when this happens, I will X, Y, and Z. My team understands they can A, B, and C, right? So building that out, I think, is just so critical for folks today.
And so proactive, right? And instead
Yeah.
of letting something control us, we control it, or we can, as best we can. I mean, the outcome's not always
Yep.
perfect, right? That's where those risk plans
Yep.
that you mentioned earlier come into play, right? It's just,
Yeah.
we can control parts of the situation. So let's take the control back where we can, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. If we had somebody out there who was, I haven't even thought about this, what are some of the first steps that they should do to get started, whether they be small or large, have no money or have all the money? What are those first few steps to take place?
There are lots of physical security providers out there who will show up and do a walkthrough, a risk assessment
Okay.
with you of your property. And 9 times out of 10, they'll do that no cost, no obligation, right? There's lots of folks out there. If you wanted to start even without picking up the phone and just do that yourself, right? Walk the premise or your local premises, right? Whether that's your
Hmm.
home, if you have a home-based business that's a large factory or a commercial office setting that you work in, do a walkthrough. And whether you do that with a professional or on your own, put in your mind, if I wanted to cause harm, how would I do it? Right. And thinking that way, and that's one of the services we provide, is that true penetration testing, where we go out and we say, okay, we're going to come try to cause harm, right? We're going to come see, where can we poke? Where are your weak areas? That's for, some of our larger clients typically who already have a security plan in place, but
Hmm.
you can do that yourself, right? You can go in and say, conduct your own penetration testing,
Hmm.
right? And see, okay, well, can I just drive right up? Is there anything stopping me from just pulling my vehicle
Right.
up to the front of your building? Because remember, vehicles can be weapons too.
Mm.
So step one. Step two is really assessing, having an honest conversation with yourself and your team, who might want to cause harm here, right? And so oftentimes with the bigger companies that we work with, those executives have, sometimes a list, right? They're like, well, here's all the people I've terminated in the past 5 years and it didn't go well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's the clients that, maybe were a little disgruntled. Depending on the line of work that you do, that can be very complex. I'll
Hmm.
tell you, one of the services we provide is executive protection, which is the industry term for bodyguard services. And folks always ask, oh my gosh, do you do celebrity protection? Do you do this and that? And yes, we do. But honestly, our biggest clients are attorneys and politicians. And so, and they're off season. So when they're out on the campaign trail, right, they need to have typically
Right.
private security when they're, in their election cycles. Depending on where they at, they have various
Right.
local law enforcement agencies that they work with. But that's our biggest portfolio. And when you think about why, right, let's go back to your question of, okay, well, what can you and I do, these
Yeah.
everyday folks? Well, where does my physical risk lie? Where are my weak areas? And then who? And that's why you can always remember, like, who really needs bodyguard services besides celebrities, right?
Right.
Politicians and lawyers,
Yeah.
because they piss a lot of people off, excuse my French, right? But that's really
No,
what it
fair
boils down
enough.
to.
Fair
So,
enough.
and then there's also the list of folks, and we have, when we do our workplace violence training, there's different categories we kind of break this into. But there's the folks who, are kind of in your immediate sphere, who, maybe have reason. But then there's the folks that have nothing to do with your business, have nothing to do with you, and it truly could just be a random act of violence. And
Mhm.
then you have the folks that are kind of 1 degree away from you. And this is the one that gets really hard, because all you can do is come up with your plan, but you can't predict. You probably won't know
Mhm.
these last two groups. The completely random groups are the 1 degree of separation folks, but that's the, you know, a aggravated husband who knows he can
Okay.
find his wife at her place of business, which is your business, right? Or um, the ex-spouse who's in a custody battle, and now that spills into the workplace. Those are the most common ones, from that
Mhm.
1 degree of separation. Again, you can't control that. You don't even really know that it's coming. All you can do is prepare if it should occur.
Yeah, and we have the same types of laws here too about like domestic violence and training on it. And what do you do when they're in the
Yep.
workplace, right? So, I mean,
Yep.
those are all great things to remember and know when we're talking about safety and, even with harassment and violence. So, lots of great information today. I greatly appreciate you sharing this with our audience. And I think it gave everybody a lot to think about, even the small businesses. How do you protect yourself? Even if you only have a few employees. So thank you so much for sharing all this information today. I greatly appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. It was fun. I'm so passionate about this. I know it's a lot of information, but hopefully everyone got one or two gold nuggets they can walk away with.
I'm sure they have. Like I said, I think this was great information and a great learning opportunity for people who haven't thought about this yet. Okay, thank you. We also do want to thank our audience. We hope you're able to gain some valuable information or tips today. If you are a leader who knows that leadership coaching, consulting, or even community are the way to grow on your leadership journey, please visit us at amplifyingleadership.ca, a Twin Life coaching and business services division. Until next time, remember, leadership matters.